Yesterday about some of the background to the historical episodes in Hanukkah. And what I wanted to focus on this morning was the important role that women played in the Hanukkah story. Uh, there's a halakhic aspect and there's a historical aspect to it. And they're both interrelated. The halakhic question is whether women should light the menorah, light candles. Uh, is it an obligation on them as well as on the male members of the family? And we'll get into that machlokes. Things emerged from that discussion. The major consideration is that the Gemara says that afhein hayu ba'osa harnes, that the women were included in the holiday of Hanukkah and the miraculous victory of the Hashmonaim over the assimilationists and the Syrian Greeks included women. The freedom of religion, freedom from all the restrictions that were placed on women and on Jews in general, they were included the same way that they were included in the miraculous aspect of Pesach. They have the same obligation of the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim as men do because they were included in the Exodus. But there are many two stories in particular we're going to focus on that deal with the role of women in Hanukkah and why it led to later on, let's see at the end, we'll see that because of the importance that women played in Hanukkah, there arose the practice that while the candles are burning, women don't do any work. It's a special limud schus, I guess, for women because so many important things happened because of women that while the candles are burning, that women don't do malacha. Again, the halakhic analysis will probably tell you because you're not allowed to benefit from the light of the menorah. And in days gone by, there wasn't too much electric illumination in the homes, no electricity at all for that matter. And you're not allowed, that's why you have a shamas, because you can't have any hanoah, any benefit from the lights of the menorah. But let's go back to Sefer HaMakkabim. Very, very important story. And again, I urge you to read the first two books of Maccabees, or Sefer Chashmonaim, it's called in some places. There was a woman named Hannah who had 7 sons. And Antiochus had them brought to him, and they were told, you must eat pork. It's a story recorded in Sefer HaMakkabim. And one by one, each son refused, and one by one, they were all executed. They were all killed. And the mother of these boys is portrayed as a heroine because she instilled in her sons a certain sense of values and, of course, heroism, of course. And it's an important story in Sefer Maccabim, which shows the resilience of the Jewish people. The Gemara tells a very similar story that took place during the Roman period, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and in that case, the woman's name was Miriam. But and it's certainly possible that variations of this story happened during both periods, and there are many instances of persecution. But the story is specifically linked in Sefer Maccabim to Hannah and her 7 sons. That's story number 1. Story number 2 has to do with a woman named Judith, and an entire book of the Sfarim Chitzonium, the Apocrypha, is called Sefer Yehudis. There's an entire, again, it's not canonical, it's not part of the Chav Dalet Sifrei Tanakh, but nevertheless, it was around at the time when the books were canonized. It just didn't make the cut, as we said yesterday. The story, however, of Yehudis is quoted by all the Rishonim. They all quote the story. So obviously they heard it from somewhere, or they read it, even though they won't admit reading Sfarim Chitzonium. Rashi, the Ran, Rashbam, they all knew the story. And it's quoted over and over again. What was the story? It's a very, very famous. I don't know if I can find the exact text here. Where is it? Give me a second here. All right. So the story is very simple. There was a decree issued by Apollonius, one of the Syrian Greek generals. And this was common in many, many cultures in cases where you had a people that was subjugated by a more powerful army, a more powerful nation. And that is called the right of the first night, which meant that any woman who got married had to spend her first night not with her husband, but she would lose her virginity to the local commander or the local general. And this was apparently put in place during the period of Hellenism in Israel, which of course was appalling. Many marriages didn't take place, or if it took place in secret. But Yehudis, and according to some traditions, Yehudis was from a priestly family. But in any event, she goes to Apollonius's tent, the general who was going to exercise his right of the first night to deflower this woman upon her marriage. And she sets up a whole scenario where she gives him all types of things to drink and makes it, as opposed to being a rape, she made it more seductive, and she got him drunk. And she basically, very similar to the story in Tanakh with Yael and Sisra, but she plied him with drink and food, and he passed out. And then she cut off his head, put it in her basket, and calmly walked back to the Jewish quarter. Then, of course, they took his head and put it on a pike, and it was displayed, and it was a great victory in that particular battle that the Hashmonaim won. And this probably, I guess, put an end to this particular horrible practice. But because this victory was brought about by a woman, then she's given a great deal of credit, and being an active participant in the story of one of the stories related to Hanukkah. So based on that, women were given a greater role in terms of the menorah lighting. And since they were included in the miracle, they should also light the menorah once that became the official practice. All the Rishonim quote the story. They discuss it within the halachic parameters of Afhein Hayu Ba'osa Hanes, that the women were included in this particular miracle. And all the early Rishonim quote the story in very flattering terms. Achronim, on the other hand, for a variety of reasons, I guess, downplay the role of women in Hanukkah. And they felt that women were still victims of Greek persecution. So the objection is somewhat mollified, but nevertheless, Rav Yaakov Emden and the Aruch HaShulchan say that this is not really part of the Hanukkah story itself, and they kind of downplay the role of women. The Rambam also. The Rambam is not a great feminist, as we've seen elsewhere, and he also doesn't talk too much about this particular thing. The mitzvah of Ner Hanukkah can definitely be fulfilled by women. Again, the Rambam omits this because he was not, again, much in favor. Again, whether that was because he lived in a Muslim land where women were very much in the background, I'm not sure of that, although I'm sure it had an effect on him. But the Shulchan Aruch says very clearly that a woman is obligated in the mitzvah of Hadlakas Ner, and she should light. The only discussion comes up. We have this expression, which the Mefarshim argue about. If everybody has an obligation to light the menorah. Initially, And again, you go through the legal discussion on it. Technically, if you light one night, one candle, one lamp, or one oil lamp per night, per family, you have fulfilled the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah, technically. If you want to be Mahadrin and do a super job, then every member of the family should light one candle each night of Hanukkah, and you have fulfilled the mitzvah. If you are Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, and you want to do a super duper job, then every member of the family lights their own Chanukiah, and then you have the machlokas whether you light in descending order or ascending order that we discussed yesterday. But the main mitzvah is one candle per night per family, and you fulfill the mitzvah. Now, if you have, does a wife in a family light her own menorah, or is she part of her? So ish toka gufo, since a husband and wife are one unit, then does that exempt her from the mitzvah of lighting Ner Chanukah? Fascinating discussion. Again, is it a mitzvah saseh shezman drama? So first of all, it's not a biblical mitzvah. So that I don't know if that entire halachic category even exists, because it's not a mitzvah saseh shezman drama. But some bring it down within that context. Furthermore, if a woman can light, can she be motzi acherim? Can she light on behalf of others? If you have let's say a single parent family, the father isn't there, can the mother light on behalf of everybody else in the family? And the answer, of course, is yes. The Taz paskins this way very clearly, and the Mishnah Brura allows women to do this, but she doesn't have to, because she's part. If the husband's there, she's considered part of her husband. Interestingly, I find fascinating, Rav Soloveitchik questions the whole concept of ish toka gufo in terms of Hanukkah, and he encouraged women, married women, talking 20th century posek, to light their own menorah. Fascinating. That in every home, instead of having just a menorah for the husband and wife and one for each child, the woman should also have her own menorah. And that's what Soloveitchik. Women might be exempt from saying Hallel on Hanukkah because of mitzvah saseh shezman groma ruling, whether she can be motzi another person. And the Achronim talk about this, but there are some who say that women are obligated to say Hallel, and they have problems with the Rambam, who apparently says that they don't. So you have people arguing with the Rambam that women are should not be exempt. However, Mr. Brewer rules conclusively that, like any other mitzvah saseh shezman grama, where a woman might be exempt, but voluntarily she can certainly do it. So there's no problem in women lighting the menorah or saying Hallel on Hanukkah. Going back now to the original story of Yehudis and Chana, the two important women of the Hanukkah story, based on those two women, the minhag arose. It's first mentioned in the Sefer Hasidim, which is 12th, 13th century, that women should refrain from malacha while the candles are burning. And all the other Rishonim bring the same minhag down. Only applies to women, not to men. Interesting. And the Tur also quotes this, and the Shulchan Aruch codifies this, that women should not do malacha while the candles are burning. Again, based on the story of the miracles that were brought about through Yehudis and the bravery of Chana and her 7 sons. The Magen Avraham mentions this because they played a key role in the persecution, and therefore they should be remembered. What malacha that women may or may not do, it might depend. Some say it just refers to knitting or sewing. because that's usually done by the light of a candle. But clearly, women are acknowledged as important, significant part of the Hanukkah story. There's a famous question now, going back to yesterday a bit. The Beis Yosef's question. The Beis Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he asks the following question. Very, very famous question. We dealt with it tangentially yesterday. If they found one cruse of oil, going back to the story of finding the oil, as they were cleaning the Beis HaMikdash, they found one bottle of oil, and the one bottle of oil was certainly enough to last at least a day. So why do we celebrate the miracle for 8 days? Miracle was only 7 days. You had enough oil for 1 day. They found the bottle of oil that could light the menorah for 1 day, and it lasted for 8 days. Fine. But the miracle really was there was enough oil to last for 1 day. The miracle should have been 7 days. And there are literally hundreds of answers to that question. The Sefer Ner Lameya gives you 100. The first attempt at answering Beis Yosef's question is this 100 answers called Sefer Ner Lameya. It's probably available online. Many try to explain the miracle as not so much a miracle, but a very practical thing. If they had to go to Tekoa to get oil, which is a 4 days journey away, how are they going to make that one bottle of oil last for 8 days? So many suggest, including the Beis Halevi, Soloveitchik's great-grandfather, after whom he's named, that they would cut the wick into eighths. They would make a thinner wick. The flame wouldn't be as big, but it would last for 8 days. Very practical way of doing it. Not necessarily relying on the miracle for the oil to keep on burning for 8 days. And there are several hundred answers to that. But the famous question of the Beis Yosef meant that they were looking at it from many, many different angles. One of the major issues that the rabbis have with Hanukkah is that they try to play down the military victory and put it more in terms of a miraculous event, because they were very much afraid that they would make heroes of the Hashmonaim who perverted halacha, basically. They took upon themselves the rule of high priest and king. They became tzedukim. They denied the validity of Torah. I mean, here are people who fought for religious freedom, and then 2 or 3 generations later, they all basically denied the validity of Torah Shebaal Peh. The rabbis were certainly not interested in promoting those people as heroes. The first generation of Hashmonaim, yes, they were heroes, no question about it. And they fought for traditional Judaism. And they kicked out the Hellenizers, and they kicked out the Syrian Greeks. But their descendants were not so kosher. And that is probably why you have very, very little discussion about Hanukkah in the Gemara. You don't want to praise people that deny your very validity. Your whole premise is false. So rather than do that, they give you a little bit of story quoted from Megillas Tanis about the story of the oil, and a little halakhic discussion of when you light the menorah. What's the earliest time you can light it? What's the latest time you can light it? In fact, they say Hallel, and that's it. Tosfos already asked the question on the Gemara. There's a concept known as Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur. Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur means that if everybody is Tameh, then the notion of Tuma doesn't exist. So the oil, any oil that they found, could have been used, technically. Now, you want to say they're again, in the notion of Mahadrim and a Mahadrim, that they would only want to use 100% kosher oil and only had that one bottle of oil, you could use that argument. But Tosfos already says, listen, they didn't have to go through all this rigmarole. They could have used any oil they found. And I don't know if there is a halachic requirement that the oil that's used has to have the seal of a Kohen Gadol. We don't find it anywhere else, to my knowledge. I could be wrong. Anyhow, there's a lot of historical information about Hanukkah. The important thing is that the light of Torah, the light of the menorah, is still burning bright. And as a famous cartoon, Dry Bones in Israel, noticed many, many years ago, that the real miracle of Hanukkah is not that the light lasted for 8 days, but that it lasted for 2,000 years, and it's still burning bright. So keep that message alive as you enjoy the rest of Hanukkah. And you can. The only internal debate that you should have among yourselves is whether sufganiyot are better than latkes. A wonderful Shabbos and a great Hanukkah.
Amen.
Freiliche Hanukkah. All the best.
Wally,
Yes.
Wally,
Thank you.
what is the biblical basis for the rabbis making the mitzvah of lighting a candle?
Okay, it's a very good question. In general, the Torah allows the rabbis to institute new practices. So even though we say Asher Kiddushan Mitzvah Vitzivanu Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah, it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. It's not a biblical mitzvah, and the rabbis have the ability to introduce new practices. Question is, which rabbis and who still do we still have that authority today? And that's an ongoing machlokes. For example, the whole story about saying celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim. Some rabbis say yes, some rabbis say no. But when you had a Sanhedrin that did it, then that became normative halachic practice. In the absence of a Sanhedrin, it's very hard to introduce new things. But clearly, the rabbis had the authority at that time to introduce new things. Reading the Megillah is also a rabbinic practice, which we say Asher Kiddushan Mitzvah Zivanu Al Mikra Megillah. But Hanukkah and Purim are two post-biblical holidays which had the sanction of the rabbinic establishment. If that answers your question. Anything else? Okay.
God. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, good Hanukkah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a good Shabbos, a good Hanukkah.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Mandy. Have a good Shabbos, a good Hanukkah.